And we're going to do two chapters today, chapters 15 and 16. If you look in your Bible, you'll probably have a heading there, a prophecy against Moab. Both the chapters are against Moab. And they form a whole. Chapter divisions weren't put there by Isaiah, but they're hundreds of years later. And you're going to think it's all about judgment. And there is judgment in there. In fact, there's judgment in practically every chapter in the Bible. But things aren't as bad as they seem. You're going to learn something today about understanding parts of the Bible, particularly the Old Testament. So let's read an odd verse or two from chapter 15. First of all, Moab came out of an incestuous relationship between Lot and one of his daughters. If you want to read the gory details, it's at the end of Genesis chapter 19. It's not a particularly edifying incident, but anyway, that's how Moab came about. And Moab was generally an enemy of Israel. Anyway, this is what it says: a prophecy against Moab. Ar in Moab is ruined, destroyed in a night. Kir in Moab is ruined, destroyed in a night. You've got some compassion in there. Verse 5, my heart cries out over Moab. Her fugitives flee as far as Zoar, as far as Eglath Shelishah. They go up to the hill of Luhith, weeping as they go. On the road to Horonaim, they lament their destruction. The waters of Dimon are full of blood, but I will bring still more Dimon, which sounds like blood, the Hebrew word for blood. A lion upon the fugitives of Moab and upon those who remain in the land. Well, you can see that's sort of seems like a typical graphic description of judgment, which you get in many of the prophets. And let's go on to 16. Let's read verses 1 to... we'll just read from verse 1. Send lambs as tribute to the ruler of the land from Selah, across the desert to the mount of daughter Zion. And then to go on to verse 4. Let the Moabite fugitives stay with you, that stay in Zion, in Israel, with you, be their shelter from the destroyer. The oppressor will come to an end, and destruction will cease. The aggressor will vanish from the land. In love, a throne will be established. In faithfulness, a man will sit on it, one from the house of David, one who in judging seeks justice and speeds the cause of righteousness. Now, particularly those last two verses, that sounds an awful lot more hopeful. And verses 4 and 5, it's clearly a prophecy of the Messiah. It's talking about Jesus. So things are looking up. But then we get into verse 6 and on to the end of the chapter. Verse 6 says, we have heard of Moab's pride. How great is her arrogance, of her conceit, her pride and her insolence. But her boasts are empty. Therefore the Moabites wail. They wail together for Moab, lament and grieve for the raisin cakes of Kir Hareseth. And let me just jump on. Let's go to verse 11 to the end. My heart laments for Moab like a harp, my inmost being for Kir Hareseth. When Moab appears at her high place, she only wears herself out. High places were places of idol worship. When she goes to her shrine to pray, it is to no avail. This is the word the Lord has spoken concerning Moab. But now the Lord says, within 3 years, as a servant bound by a contract would count them, Moab's splendour and all her many people will be despised, and her survivors will be very few and feeble. So what do we have here? We've got almost unremitting judgment, apart from a couple of verses in the middle, or partway through chapter 16. And then it goes back into judgment. And we think, this looks pretty grim. There's a slight glimmer of hope at one point, but then just all collapse in a heap. Well, that's not what it's actually saying. Verses 4 and 5 are the cornerstone of this section. a lot of stuff in the Old Testament and bits in here and there in the New Testament, beginning of John's Gospel, for instance, have what's called a chiasmic structure. Now, when we read things, we start at the beginning and we go to the end, and the conclusion is at the end. In a chiasmic structure, the central point, the focal point, is in the middle. And you've got kind of a symmetry or parallelism either side of that. So, right at the start in 15, we have judgment upon Moab. Right at the end, as we read there in chapter 16, we have judgment upon Moab. But the pinnacle, the focal point, of verses 4 and 5, the oppressor will come to an end and destruction will cease. The aggressor will vanish from the land. In love a throne will be established. In faithfulness a man will sit on it. One from the house of David, one who in judging seeks justice and speeds the cause of righteousness. That is where things are going. And eventually the Moabites will find refuge in Zion. But the judgment is real. It happened. Got to make it absolutely clear in there. It was going to happen, and it did happen. If we look at our whole world, there is judgment upon the whole world. But there are also, God's purpose, there are also many who God will bring to find salvation in Jesus. So I say it's not as bad as it looks. There is hope in there. Good morning.